Picture a quiet village, St. Mary Mead, where secrets whisper in every corner. Miss Jane Marple, a sweet old lady with a razor-sharp mind, gets a chilling letter warning of a murder at a grand estate. When a glamorous widow is found dead, a dagger in her chest, everyone thinks it's a robbery, except Miss Marple. Armed with her secret weapon, a tiny notebook filled with coded village gossip, she unravels a web of lies, love, and betrayal. Will her hidden eye catch the killer? Before they strike again, let's dive into a cozy mystery where no secret stays buried. Chapter 1. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead. The sun peeked over the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. It was a place where time seemed to dawdle, where cottages with thatched roofs huddled together like old friends, and where the church bell rang every Sunday with a comforting clang. The villagers went about their days, tending gardens, sipping tea, and sharing stories over low stone walls. Gossip was the lifeblood of St. Mary Mead, flowing as freely as the stream that wound through the meadows. Everyone knew everyone else's business or thought they did. In a small cottage on the edge of the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window. Her parlor was cozy with lace curtains that fluttered in the breeze and a fireplace that crackled on chilly evenings. A basket of yarn sat at her feet, and her knitting needles clicked in a steady rhythm, like the ticking of a clock. She was a slight woman with snow-white hair tied in a neat bun and eyes that twinkled behind her spectacles. To the villagers, she was just a sweet old lady who loved her garden and her tea. But beneath her gentle smile and soft voice, Miss Marple had a mind sharper than a tailor's scissors. She sipped her morning tea, the steam curling up from a delicate china cup. Her gaze drifted to the village green outside, where children played tag and Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, hurried along with a basket of fresh loaves. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. She loved St. Mary Mead, not just for its charm, but for its secrets. People thought they could hide their true selves, but Miss Marple saw everything the way a glance lingered too long. The way a voice tightened when certain names were mentioned. She didn't need to chase clues like the police. The clues came to her, carried on the whispers of the village. As she set her teacup down, a soft thud came from the front door. Miss Marple tilted her head, curious. It was too early for visitors, and the postman didn't come until noon. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and shuffled to the door. On the mat lay a single envelope, plain and white, with no stamp or address. Her name, Miss Jane Marple, was written in neat, slanting handwriting. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the crisp paper, and returned to her parlor. Sitting back in her armchair, she studied the envelope. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried more than just words. She slid it open with a letter opener, careful not to tear the paper, and pulled out a single sheet. The message was short, written in the same careful hand. Beware the shadow at Bantry's estate. Death waits in the wings, unseen by all but the hidden eye. Trust no one. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. The words were dramatic, almost theatrical, but they sent a shiver down her spine. Colonel Bantry's estate, a grand old manor on the hill, was the heart of St. Mary Mead's social scene. The colonel and his wife Dolly were known for their lavish parties, where the village's elite mingled over champagne and gossip. A murder at their home? It seemed unthinkable. Yet the letter's tone held a certainty that made Miss Marple pause. She read it again, her eyes lingering on the phrase hidden eye. It felt personal, as if the writer knew something about her, something no one else did. She folded the letter and tucked it into her knitting basket, under a skein of soft blue wool. Her heart beat a little faster, not with fear, but with excitement. A puzzle had landed in her lap, and Miss Marple loved puzzles. She leaned back, her knitting needles resuming their dance. Her mind churned, piecing together what she knew. Colonel Bantry was a retired soldier, gruff but kind, with a booming laugh that filled a room. Dolly, his wife, was lively and charming, always eager to play hostess. Their estate, with its sprawling gardens and oak-paneled rooms, was a place of warmth and celebration. But every grand house had its shadows, and every village had its secrets. Miss Marple knew that better than anyone. She thought of the people who frequented the Bantry estate. There was Mrs. Lacey, a beautiful widow with a sharp tongue and a habit of flirting with every man in sight. Dr. Haydock, the village doctor, was a regular guest, always quiet but watchful, his eyes missing nothing. Then there was Tom Carver, the colonel's nephew and heir, a young man with a charming smile but a reputation for gambling. Any of them could be tied to the letter's warning, but how? And why send it to her? Miss Marple's fingers paused. The needles still. She reached for the letter again, rereading it in the morning light. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the ink had a faint shimmer, like the kind used by someone who took pride in their penmanship. She held the paper to her nose, catching a whiff of lavender. It was a clue, small but telling. Few people in St. Mary Mead used scented stationery. Mrs. Price did, but her writing was round and childish. Dolly Bantry favored elegant notepaper, but her hand was bolder, less precise. This was someone else, someone careful, someone secretive. She set the letter down and glanced at her knitting basket. Hidden beneath the yarn was her greatest secret, her true weapon in solving mysteries. It wasn't a magnifying glass or a fingerprint kit like the detectives in the stories she read. It was something far simpler, yet far more powerful. A small leather-bound notebook, no bigger than a prayer book. For years, Miss Marple had filled its pages with observations about St. Mary Mead, every glance, every rumor, every slip of the tongue. She wrote in a code only she understood, a mix of shorthand and symbols that turned gossip into evidence. The notebook was her hidden eye, a record of the village's heart. It held the truth about Mr. Price's late-night deliveries, which weren't always bread, and Mrs. Lacey's secret meetings in the churchyard. It noted Tom Carver's debts and Dr. Haydock's habit of lingering near the Bantry estate after dark. Miss Marple didn't judge. She simply observed, connecting dots that others missed. The notebook had helped her solve mysteries before, small ones like missing jewelry or a poisoned cat, but a murder, that was new. She didn't touch the notebook yet. It was too soon, and she needed more to go on. Instead, she rose and crossed to her writing desk, where a small calendar sat. She flipped to the current month, her finger tracing the days. Today was Wednesday, and she remembered Dolly Bantry mentioning a dinner party at the estate on Friday. It was to be a grand affair, with all the usual guests. If the letter's warning was true, the party could be the stage for something terrible. Miss Marple tapped her chin, thinking. She needed to be at that party, not just as a guest, but as a watcher. She would listen, smile, and let the village's secrets spill around her. People always talked too much in her presence, mistaking her quiet nature for disinterest. They didn't know she was weaving their words into a tapestry of truth. She returned to her armchair, picking up her knitting. The needles clicked again, a soothing sound that helped her think. She pictured the Bantry estate, its long driveway lined with elms, its windows glowing with candlelight. She imagined the guests laughing, clinking glasses, unaware of the shadow. The letter spoke of, her mind spun through possibilities. Was the killer already among them, hiding behind a polite smile? Or was the letter a prank, meant to stir trouble? She didn't think so. The lavender scent, the careful handwriting, it all felt deliberate. Like a message meant for her alone. As the morning wore on, the village came alive outside her window. The milkman rattled by with his cart, and the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, waved as she passed. Miss Marple waved back, her face serene. No one would guess the storm of thoughts behind her calm exterior. She was already planning her next move. She would call on Dolly Bantry tomorrow, offering to help with the party preparations. It was the perfect excuse to visit the estate, too. Poke around and see what she could learn. She set her knitting aside and stood, stretching her arms. The letter lay in her basket, a silent challenge. She didn't know who had sent it or why, but she trusted her instincts. Something was coming, something dark, and she would be ready. Her notebook, her hidden eye, would guide her, as it always had. She glanced at the basket, a small smile playing on her lips. Let the village whisper its secrets. Miss Marple was listening. The day passed quietly. She tended her roses, chatted with the postman, and baked a batch of scones for the vicar's tea. But her mind never strayed far from the letter. By evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, she sat again in her parlor, the fire casting shadows on the walls. She reached into her basket and pulled out the notebook, its leather cover worn from years of use. She didn't open it, not yet, just simply held it, feeling its weight in her hands. It was more than a book. It was a key unlocking the truth hidden in plain sight. She thought of the letter's words, "Trust no one." It was good advice, but Miss Marple trusted herself. She trusted her eyes, her ears, and the quiet power of her notebook. Whatever waited at the Bantry estate, she would find it. She would unravel the mystery, thread by thread, till the shadow was brought into the light as the clock struck 8. She set the notebook back in the basket and picked up her knitting. The needles clicked, steady and sure, like the beat of her heart. Outside, St. Mary Mead settled into the night, its secrets tucked away in the dark. But Miss Marple was awake, her mind alight with questions. The game had begun, and she was ready to play. Chapter 2. The Colonel's Dinner Party. The Bantry estate glowed under the twilight sky, its windows spilling golden light onto the manicured lawns. The grand manor, with its ivy-covered walls and tall chimneys, stood like a proud sentinel over St. Mary Mead. Inside, the air buzzed with the clink of glasses and the hum of laughter. Colonel Bantry's dinner party was in full swing, and the village's elite had gathered to eat, drink, and trade gossip. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a simple black dress with a lace shawl, stepped through the oak doors, her eyes bright with quiet purpose. Dolly Bantry greeted her at the entrance, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Jane, you darling! I'm so glad you came," she chirped. Looping an arm through Miss Marple's, Dolly was a whirlwind of energy, her red curls bouncing as she moved. She wore an emerald green gown that shimmered in the chandelier light, and her laughter rang like bells. "Come, let me show you to the drawing room. Everyone's here." Miss Marple smiled, letting herself be led. She clutched her small handbag where the mysterious letter lay tucked beside a handkerchief. The warning, beware the shadow at Bantry's estate. Death waits in the wings, echoed in her mind. She scanned the hallway as they walked, noting the polished floors, the portraits of stern-faced Bantrys, and the faint scent of roses from a vase nearby. Everything seemed perfect, yet the letter's words cast a shadow over the warmth. The drawing room was a sea of color and noise. Men in tailored suits and women in sparkling dresses mingled, their voices weaving a tapestry of chatter. A fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Colonel Bantry stood by the mantel, a glass of brandy in hand, his mustache twitching as he told a story about his army days. His booming laugh cut through the room, drawing smiles from his guests. Miss Marple's gaze swept the crowd, picking out familiar faces. There was Mrs. Lacey, the widow, in a low-cut scarlet dress that turned heads. Her dark hair was piled high, and her lips curved in a teasing smile as she leaned close to Dr. Haydock. The doctor, a tall man with sharp features and graying hair, nodded politely, but his eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. Nearby, Tom Carver, the colonel's nephew, lounged against a sofa, his boyish grin masking a nervous energy. His suit was slightly rumpled, and he sipped his wine too quickly. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her handbag. Any of them could be the shadow the letter warned of. Dolly steered her toward a velvet chair by the window. "Sit here, Jane. I'll fetch you some sherry. You must tell me what you think of my new curtains." She bustled off, leaving Miss Marple to observe. She settled into the chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. To anyone watching, she was just a quiet old lady, content to sip her drink and listen. But her eyes missed nothing, and her mind was already at work. Sifting through the scene like a miner panning for gold, she noticed Mrs. Lacey's hand brush Dr. Haydock's arm, a touch that lingered too long. Dr. Haydock stiffened, his smile tightened, excused himself to refill his glass. Tom Carver, meanwhile, was cornered by Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, who was talking loudly about her prize roses. Tom nodded, but his eyes kept flicking to the door as if he wanted to bolt. Miss Marple's lips twitched. People were so predictable. Wearing their secrets like ill-fitting clothes, a servant announced dinner, and the guests flowed into the dining room. The long mahogany table gleamed under crystal chandeliers set with silver cutlery and delicate china. Miss Marple found herself seated between Dolly and Mr. Price, the baker, who smelled faintly of yeast. She smiled politely, letting the conversation swirl around her. Colonel Bantry, at the head of the table, carved a roast with military precision, while Dolly kept the chatter lively, asking about everyone's summer plans. As soup was served, Miss Marple listened to Mrs. Lacey, who sat across from her, teasing Tom Carver about his latest trip to London. "You must tell us, Tom," she purred, her eyes glinting. "Did you win big at the card tables, or did they fleece you again?" Tom laughed, but his knuckles whitened around his spoon. "Oh, you know me, always a bit of fun," he said, his voice too bright. Miss Marple noted the exchange, her mind flashing to her notebook's entry about Tom's gambling debts. Dr. Haydock, seated beside Mrs. Lacey, was quieter, his answers short. When Dolly asked about his new clinic, he murmured something about long hours and changed the subject. Miss Marple tilted her head, catching a faint tremor in his voice. Was it nerves or something else? She sipped her soup, her thoughts racing. The letter had spoken of a hidden eye, and she felt its weight now, urging her to see what others missed. The meal progressed: roast beef, potatoes and peas in butter, sauce, each course more delicious than the last. The guests relaxed, their tongues loosened by wine. Miss Marple stayed alert, her ears tuned to every word. She asked Mr. Price about his bakery, drawing out a story about a late-night delivery to the estate. "Odd, though," he said, scratching his head. The Colonel didn't seem to know about it. Miss Marple filed the detail away, her smile unchanging dot. As dessert was served lemon tarts with cream, the clock on the mantel chimed 9. The sound was soft, almost lost in the laughter, but it made Miss Marple's skin prickle. She glanced around, her instincts tingling. Something was wrong, though she couldn't say what. She set her fork down, her eyes scanning the table. Everyone was accounted for, their faces flushed with warmth and wine. Yet the letter's warning gnawed at her dot. Then it came, a scream, sharp and piercing, from the direction of the library. The room froze, glasses clattering as hands stilled. Colonel Bantry stood, his chair scraping the floor. "What the devil?" he began, but another scream cut him off. Dolly gasped, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, what's happening?" she whispered. Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice calm. "Stay here, dear. I'll go see." She rose, moving faster than her age suggested, and followed the Colonel and several guests toward the library. The heavy door stood ajar, and a faint light spilled into the hall. Colonel Bantry pushed it open, revealing a scene that made even his soldier's heart falter. Mrs. Lacey lay sprawled on the rug, her scarlet dress fanned around her like spilled wine. A dagger protruded from her chest, its handle gleaming in the lamplight. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, her face frozen in shock. Dr. Haydock knelt beside her, his fingers at her wrist. He looked up, his face pale. "She's dead," he said, his voice hollow. The guests crowded the doorway, gasping and whispering. Tom Carver stood frozen, his wineglass still in hand, his face drained of color. Dolly sobbed, clinging to her husband. Miss Marple stepped forward, her eyes sweeping the room. The library was grand, with tall bookshelves and a marble fireplace. A window was open, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze. Papers lay scattered on a desk, and a single chair was tipped over. Colonel Bantry barked orders, sending a servant. "To fetch the police. Nobody leaves this house," he growled, his military training kicking in. Miss Marple moved closer to the body, her movements careful. She didn't touch anything, but her eyes drank in every detail. Mrs. Lacey's dress was untouched except for the dagger's wound. Her jewelry, diamond earrings, and a pearl necklace remained, ruling out robbery. But something caught Miss Marple's eye. A faint smudge of ink on Mrs. Lacey's right hand, shimmering faintly, just like the letter's ink. Her heart quickened. She glanced at the desk where a pen lay beside an open ink bottle. The bottle was the same brand she'd seen in Dolly's writing room. But the ink's shimmer was rare, a detail that linked the body to her mysterious letter. She stepped back, her mind racing. The police would call this a robbery gone wrong, but Miss Marple knew better. This was no random act. The dagger, the ink, the open window, it was all too neat, like a stage set for a play. Inspector Slack arrived. Within the hour, his boots thudding on the polished floor. He was a burly man with a scowl, impatient and quick to judge. He surveyed the scene, barking questions at the guests. "Who saw her last? Where were you all?" he demanded. The answers were muddled. Everyone had been at the table, or so they claimed. Slack's eyes narrowed at Tom Carver, whose nervous fidgeting made him an easy target. "You, boy," he snapped. "Got any reason to be in the library?" Tom stammered, his face reddening. "No, sir. I was with Mrs. Price, talking about roses." Mrs. Price nodded, but her eyes darted away. Miss Marple watched, her lips pursed. Tom was hiding something, but murder. She wasn't sure. Her notebook would tell her more. Once she could consult it, Slack declared the library a crime scene and herded everyone back to the drawing room. The guests were shaken, their earlier cheer replaced by fear. Dolly clung to Miss Marple, whispering, "Who could do this, Jane, in our home?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice soothing. "We'll find out, dear. Don't you worry." But her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle. She thought of the letter, now heavy in her handbag. The hidden "I had seen something," and so had Mrs. Lacey's killer. The ink smudge was no accident. It was a thread, linking the murder to the warning. Miss Marple's fingers itched to open her notebook to cross-reference her notes on Mrs. Lacey, Tom, and Dr. Haydock. But she couldn't not hear. She would wait until she was home, where her secret weapon could work its magic. As the police questioned the guests, Miss Marple sat quietly, her eyes moving from face to face. Dr. Haydock's hands trembled as he spoke to Slack, though his voice was steady. Tom kept rubbing his neck, his eyes avoiding the library door. Even Dolly seemed nervous, her laughter replaced by quick, anxious glances. Everyone had a secret. Miss Marple knew, and one of them had killed to protect it. The night dragged on, the manor's warmth replaced by a chill. Inspector Slack announced that everyone could go home but to stay in the village for questioning. Miss Marple gathered her shawl and handbag, her face serene. As she stepped into the cool night air, the manor's lights glowed behind her, a beacon of secrets. She walked home, her steps slow but steady, the letter's words echoing in her mind. Back in her cottage, she lit a lamp and sank into her armchair. She opened her handbag, pulling out the letter and studying it anew. The ink, the lavender scent, the careful handwriting, it all pointed to someone close to the Bantry estate. She reached into her knitting basket, her fingers brushing the leather. Cover of her notebook, she didn't open it yet. She needed to think, to let the pieces settle. Mrs. Lacey's death was no accident, she was sure. The dagger was too precise, the scene too staged. The killer had wanted it to look like a robbery, but the ink smudge betrayed them. Miss Marple's lips curved into a small smile. Her hidden eye, her notebook, would see what the police could not. She set the letter down and picked up her knitting. the needles clicking softly. The game was afoot, and Miss Marple was ready to play. Chapter 3. The Hidden Eye Unveiled. The morning after the murder, St. Mary Mead buzzed with whispers. The news of Mrs. Lacey's death spread like wildfire, carried from cottage to shop to garden gate. Villagers huddled in doorways, their voices low, their eyes wide with shock. In her cozy cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the parlor window, her knitting needles silent for once. The air was crisp, the sun casting long shadows across the village green. But her mind was far from the peaceful scene outside. She held the mysterious letter in one hand, its words, "Beware the shadow at Bantry's estate. Death waits in." The wings unseen by all but the hidden eye burning in her thoughts. She set the letter on the table, her fingers brushing its crisp edge. The ink smudge on Mrs. Lacey's hand, shimmering like the letter's ink, was no coincidence. It was a clue, a thread in the tangled web of the murder. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind sharp as a needle. The police, led by Inspector Slack, were chasing a thief who didn't exist, but she knew better. The killer was someone at the dinner party. Someone who knew Mrs. Lacey's secrets and, perhaps, Miss Marple's own. She rose, crossing to her knitting basket by the armchair. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but her heart beat with purpose. She pushed aside skeins of soft wool, her fingers finding the small leather-bound notebook hidden beneath. It was no bigger than a diary, its cover worn from years of careful handling. This was her secret weapon, her hidden eye, and it held the key to unraveling the mystery. For decades, she had filled its pages with the village's secret salve. Glance, whisper, and slip that revealed the truth beneath St. Mary Mead's polite surface. To anyone else, it was just a book of scribbles, but to Miss Marple, it was a map of human nature. She carried the notebook to her writing desk, where sunlight streamed through lace curtains. Sitting down, she opened it, the pages crackling softly. Her code shorthand mixed with tiny symbols stared back at her, a language only she could read. She flipped to a section marked with a small star, her notes on Mrs. Lacey, the widow's name appeared often, linked to late-night walks, hushed meetings, and a string of admirers. One entry, dated a month ago, caught her eye. M.L. seen with Dr. H. near churchyard. 11 p.m. whispered argument. M.L. held a paper, possibly a letter. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Dr. Haydock, the quiet doctor, had been at the dinner party. His face pale when Mrs. Lacey's body was found. She turned to another page, this one about Tom Carver, the colonel's nephew. Her notes painted a picture of a charming young man with a dangerous habit, TCO's £500 to London bookie, seen arguing with M.L. at village fete. M.L. laughed, said, "Pay up or I'll talk." Tom's nervous fidgeting at the party made sense now. Mrs. Lacey had something on him. Something worth killing to keep quiet. But was it enough to drive him to murder? Miss Marple leaned back, her fingers tapping the desk. The notebook was more than a record. 'Twas a mirror reflecting the village's hidden truths. 'Twas started it years ago, after a stolen brooch at the vicarage revealed how his Lee people lied. Over time it grew, capturing St. Mary Mead's heartbeats, loves, its betrayals, its fears. She never showed it to anyone, not even Dolly Bantry, her closest friend. It was her private tool, a way to see what others missed. And now it was pointing her toward a killer. She closed the notebook, her mind racing. The ink smudge on Mrs. Lacey's hand linked her to the letter. But how? Had she written it, warning Miss Marple of her own danger? Or had someone else sent it, knowing Mrs. Lacey was a target? The lavender scent on the paper nagged at her. It was faint but distinct, a clue that felt personal. She stood pacing the parlor, her slippers soft on the rug. The answer was in the notebook, she was sure. But she needed to dig deeper. She returned to the desk, opening the notebook again. This time she flipped to her notes on Dr. Haydock. The doctor was a puzzle calm, reserved, but always watching. Her entries noted his late-night visits to the Bantry estate, often after Mrs. Lacey's carriage was seen leaving. Dr. H. carries black bag, even on social calls. Seen leaving M.L.'s cottage, 1 a.m., look intense. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. An affair, perhaps? Or something darker? Mrs. Lacey had a way of collecting secrets, and Dr. Haydock's nervous glances at the party suggested he had plenty to hide. She set the notebook down, her thoughts swirling. The murder scene replayed in her mind. Mrs. Lacey's body on the library rug. The dagger in her chest, the open window, the scattered papers. Inspector Slack had called it a robbery, but the untouched jewelry told a different story. The killer wanted it to look like a break-in, but the ink smudge was a mistake, a slip that betrayed them. Miss Marple's fingers itched to write a new entry, to connect the dots, but she held back. She needed something to tie the letter, the ink, and the murder together. The clock on the mantel chimed 10, its gentle ding pulling her from her thoughts. Okay. She glanced out the window where the village was settling into its morning rhythm. The milkman rattled by, and Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, waved as she tended her garden. Miss Marple waved back, her face serene. No one would guess the storm of questions in her mind. She was a spider in a web, waiting for the killer to twitch a thread. She decided to visit the Bantry estate. Dolly had invited her to help with the aftermath of the party, and it was the perfect excuse to snoop. She tucked the notebook back into her knitting basket, hiding it under the wool. The letter went into her handbag alongside her spectacles and a peppermint. She put on her coat and hat, her movements brisk, and stepped outside. The air was cool, scented with grass and roses, and the path to the estate wound through fields dotted with sheep. As she walked, she thought of the dinner party. The guests had been lively, their laughter filling the manor, but beneath it all, tension simmered. Mrs. Lacey's teasing words to Tom, Dr. Haydock's stiff politeness. Tom's nervous glances. Her notebook had predicted their behavior as if she'd written the script. She smiled faintly. People were so predictable, their secrets bubbling up like tea in a kettle. The Bantry estate came into view, its chimneys rising against the sky. The gardens were quiet, the roses drooping as if mourning Mrs. Lacey. Miss Marple climbed the steps to the front door, her handbag swinging. A maid let her in, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Bantry's in the morning room. Miss, she said, her voice shaky. Miss Marple nodded, patting the girl's arm. There, dear. It'll be all right. Dolly was slumped in a chair. Her usual sparkle dimmed. The morning room was bright, with tall windows and floral curtains, but the air felt heavy. Oh, Jane, Dolly sighed, rising to hug her. It's awful. Poor Mrs. Lacey, and in our home. The police are poking everywhere, and Arthur's beside himself. She gestured to a tray of tea and scones. Sit, please. I need your calm. Head. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her handbag in her lap. She poured tea, her movements steady, and let Dolly talk. The words poured out how the police had searched the library, how Inspector Slack suspected Tom, how the village was buzzing with rumors. Miss Marple listened, her eyes soft but alert. She steered the conversation gently, asking about the guests. Dr. Haydock seemed shaken, she said, sipping her tea. Did he know Mrs. Lacey well? Dolly hesitated, her fingers twisting a napkin. Well, they were friendly. She was always flirting, you know how she was. But I saw him at her cottage. Once, late at night. I thought it was a medical call, but her voice trailed off, her cheeks pink. Miss Marple nodded, her mind flashing to her notebook's entry. Another thread, another knot in the web. She asked about Tom next, keeping her tone light. He's such a charming boy, but he looked nervous last night. Is he all right? Dolly sighed, leaning closer. It's in trouble, Jane. Arthur says he owes money gambling, you know? Mrs. Lacey teased him about it, and I think she knew more than she let on. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The notebook had at Altum's debts, Mrs. Lacey's taunts. It was as if the murder had been written in her pages long before it happened. She stayed an hour, coaxing details from Dolly. The colonel joined them briefly, his mustache drooping. "Damned mess," he muttered, pacing. "Slack thinks it's a vagrant, but I don't buy it. That dagger's from my collection, you know?" Miss Marple's ears pricked. A family dagger. That ruled out an outsider. She filed the detail away, her smile unchanged before leaving. She asked to see the library, claiming she'd lost a hairpin. Dolly led her down the hall where a policeman stood guard. "Just a moment," Miss Marple said sweetly, and the young officer, charmed by her grandmotherly air, let her peek inside. The room looked much as it had last night: bookshelves, fireplace, desk. The rug was gone, taken for evidence, and the window was shut. She scanned the desk, her eyes catching a faint ink stain on the blotter, shimmering like the smudge on Mrs. Lacey's hand. She thanked Dolly and left, her mind buzzing. The ink was the key, tying the letter to the murder. Back home, she sank into her armchair, pulling out the notebook. She opened it to a blank page, her pen hovering. She wrote in her code, her hand. Steady ink on ML's hand matches letter, shimmering, rare. Seen on estate desk, Dr. HNTC, both linked to ML dagger from Bantry collection. No outsider. She paused, then added, "Hidden eye sees all. Killer knows it." She closed the notebook, her heart pounding. The killer was clever, staging a robbery to fool the police, but they hadn't counted on her. The notebook was her weapon, its pages and net closing around the truth. She thought of Dr. Haydock's trembling hands, Tom's nervous eyes, even Dolly's anxious glances. Someone had plunged that dagger into Mrs. Lacey's chest, and the notebook would tell her who she stood, pacing the parlor. The letters, words, "trust no one," rang in her ears. She didn't trust, not yet, but she trusted. Her hidden eye, her secret weapon. It had never failed her, and it wouldn't now. She glanced at the knitting basket where the notebook lay hidden. Let the killer think they were safe. Miss Marple was watching, and she would see them in the end. The day passed quietly. She baked biscuits for the vicar's tea, tended her roses, and waved to passing neighbors. But her mind never left the murder. By evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, she sat again with a notebook, rereading her notes. The web was tightening, the threads coming together. Mrs. Lacey's secrets. The ink, the dagger, all pointed to someone close, someone at the heart of St. Mary Mead. She set the notebook down, picking up her knitting. The needles clicked, a steady rhythm that calmed her thoughts. The village slept, its secrets tucked away in the dark. But Miss Marple was awake, her hidden eye open, ready to catch a killer. Chapter 4. A web of motives. The sun climbed high over St. Mary Mead, its rays warming the cobblestone paths and tidy gardens. The village hummed with its usual rhythm, children chasing hoops, the blacksmith's hammer clanging, and neighbors swapping stories over fences. But beneath the everyday chatter, dark current ran. Mrs. Lacey's murder at the Bantry estate had shaken the village. Every glance held a question. Who had driven that dagger into her heart? In her cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needle still, her mind weaving a net to catch a killer. She held her leather-bound notebook, its pages heavy with secrets. The hidden eye, as she called it, had already revealed much. Her coded notes linked Mrs. Lacey to Dr. Haydock's late-night visits and Tom Carver's gambling debts. The shimmering ink smudge on Mrs. Lacey's hand matched the mysterious letters ink, a clue that tied the murder to the warnings she'd received. Beware the shadow at Bantry's estate. Death waits in the wings, unseen by all but the hidden eye. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The killer was clever, staging a robbery to fool Inspector Slack. But they hadn't counted on her. She set the notebook in her knitting basket, hiding it under a skein of wool. The ink smudge nagged at her. Why leave it on Mrs. Lacey's hand, yet wipe the dagger clean? It felt deliberate, like a breadcrumb left for her to find. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and decided to visit the pantry. Estate again. Dolly had asked for help sorting linens, a perfect excuse to poke around. She slipped the letter into her handbag, grabbed her hat, stepped into the bright morning dot. The walk to the estate was pleasant, the air scented with lavender and freshly cut grass. Miss Marple's steps were slow, her eyes scanning the village. Mrs. Price waved from her bakery, her smile tight. The vicar, Mr. Clement, nodded as he trimmed his hedge, but his eyes lingered on her, curious. News of her presence at the murder scene had spread, and St. Mary Mead was watching. She smiled back, her face serene, giving nothing away. The Bantry estate loomed ahead, its ivy-covered walls glowing in the sunlight. The gardens were quiet, the roses still drooping as if in grief. Miss Marple climbed the steps and knocked. A maid, her apron wrinkled, let her in. "Mrs. Bantry's in the drawing room, miss," she said, her voice low. Miss Marple thanked her, noting the girl's red-rimmed eyes. The manner felt different today, hushed, as if holding its breath. Dolly greeted her with a tired smile, her red curls pinned loosely. "Jane, you're a saint for coming," she said, leading her to a sofa piled with linens. The drawing room was cozy, with floral curtains and a crackling fire, but Dolly's hands trembled as she poured tea. The police are still poking about, and Arthur's in a state. They think Tom did it, but I can't believe it. He's family. Miss Marple settled beside her, her handbag in her lap. She sipped her tea, letting Dolly talk. The words spilled out how Inspector Slack had questioned Tom for hours. How the dagger was from the Colonel's collection, how Mrs. Lacey's flirting had caused trouble. Miss Marple listened, her ears tuned to every detail. She asked gently, "Did Mrs. Lacey ever mention Dr. Haydock?" They seemed close. Dolly's eyes widened, her voice dropping. "Oh, Jane, you're sharp." "Yes, they were." "Friendly?" "I saw him leaving her cottage late one night, carrying that black bag of his. I thought it was a medical call, but she was healthy as a horse, and she was always teasing him, making him blush." She leaned closer, whispering, "I think she had something. On him she was like that. You know, collecting secrets like buttons." Miss Marple nodded, her mind flashing to her notebook's entry. Dr. H. seen at ML's cottage, 1 a.m. tens. The affair was likely, but secrets. That was motive. She steered the conversation to Tom. "Poor boy looked nervous at the party. Is he in trouble?" Dolly sighed, twisting her napkin. "Arthur says he owes money, hundreds, from gambling. Mrs. Lacey knew, and she wasn't kind about it. She teased him in front of everyone, saying he'd lose the estate if he wasn't careful." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Her notebook had it all. TC owes £500. ML threatened to talk. Tom's fear made sense, but murder? She needed more. She asked about the dagger, keeping her tone light. "The Colonel's collection is impressive. Was it locked away?" Dolly shook her head. "No, it's in the library, on display. Anyone could have taken it." "That's what scares me, Jane. It was one of us." The words hung in the air, heavy as smoke. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes soft but sharp. The dagger's origin ruled out a stranger, narrowing the suspects to the dinner guests, she thought. Of the library, the open window, the scattered papers, the ink stain on the desk. The scene was staged, she was sure, but the ink smudge was a mistake. The killer hadn't meant to leave it, and that slip would be their undoing. She helped Dolly fold linens, her hands steady as her mind raced. She asked about the other guests, coaxing out details. Mr. Price, the baker, had been at the party, his loud laugh filling the room. "He's harmless," Dolly said. "But he was cross with Mrs. Lacey. She owed him 4 months of bread, and he said she laughed it off." Miss Marple filed it away, though Mr. Price seemed unlikely. His secrets were small, not worth killing for. Colonel Bantry joined them, his mustache bristling. "Jane, good to see you," he grunted, sinking into a chair. "This business is a nightmare. Slack's got it all wrong, chasing robbers when the answer's under our noses." Miss Marple tilted her head, encouraging him to talk. He leaned forward, his voice low. Mrs. Lacey was trouble. She had a way of digging up dirt. "I saw her whispering with Dr. Haydock once, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Another thread, another knot. She asked about the library, claiming she'd misplaced a glove. "Could I take a peek?" she said, her voice sweet. The colonel nodded, leading her down the hall. A policeman stood outside, but the colonel waved him off. "Just a minute, lad. Miss Marple's no criminal." The officer grinned, charmed by her grandmotherly air. The library was dim, the curtains drawn. The rug was still gone, and the desk bore the faint ink stain she'd noticed before. She bent closer, her spectacles glinting, and saw tiny specks of shimmering ink, like stars on the blotter. Her heart leaped. It matched the letter and the smudge on Mrs. Lacey's hand. She glanced at the dagger's display case, now empty, and noted its lock simple, easily picked. The window was shut, but she pictured it open, the curtains fluttering as the killer slipped out. Or had they? Asterisk, she thanked the colonel, her smile warm. Back in the drawing room, she finished her tea, her mind spinning. The ink was the key, but why was the dagger wiped clean? It was as if the killer wanted the ink to be found to point somewhere else. She thought of her notebook, its pages mapping the village's secrets. Dr. Haydock's late-night visits, Tom's debts, even Dolly's. Nervous glances, everyone had a motive, but only one had acted as she prepared to leave. Dolly clutched her hand. "Jane, you'll figure this out, won't you? You always see things we miss." Miss Marple patted her, her voice soothing. "I'll do my best, dear." But her eyes were sharp, already planning her next move. She needed to test her suspects, to shake the web and see who flinched. Back home, she sank into her armchair, pulling the notebook from its hiding place. She opened it to a blank page, her pen scratching in her secret code. Ink on desk matches, letter M, L's hand. Dagger from Bantry Collection, Lock Week. Dr. H, linked to MLS secrets. TC threatened by ML over debts. Murder staged. Ink deliberate. She paused, then added, killer knows hidden eye. Testing needed. She closed the notebook, her heart steady. The web was tightening, but she needed one more piece of slip. A glance, a word to betray the killer, she thought. Of the village fete tomorrow, where St. Mary Mead would gather to eat cake and swap gossip. It was the perfect place to watch her suspects, to drop a hint and see who reacted. Her lips curved into a smile. The killer thought they were safe, but they didn't know her secret weapon. The rest of the day passed quietly. She baked scones. For the fete, pruned her roses and chatted with the postman. But her mind never left the murder. By evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, she sat again with the notebook, rereading her notes. The ink, the dagger, the letter, it all pointed to someone close, someone who knew Mrs. Lacey's power and feared it. She thought of Dr. Haydock's trembling hands, Tom's nervous eyes, even the colonel's gruff unease. The answer was in her pages, waiting to be found. She set the notebook back in the basket, picking up her knitting. The needles clicked. A rhythm that calmed her thoughts. Village slept, its secrets hidden in the dark. But Miss Marple was awake, her hidden eye open, ready to catch a killer. Tomorrow at the fete, she would tug the web and watch it quiver. The truth was close, and she would find it thread by thread. Chapter 5. The Final Revelation. The village green of St. Mary Mead sparkled under the midday sun. Alive with the bustle of the annual fete, stalls draped in bright bunting offered cakes, jams, and knitted scarves, while children darted through, the crowd clutching toffee apples. Laughter and chatter filled the air. But a shadow hung over the festivities. Mrs. Lacey's murder at the Bantry estate was on everyone's lips, whispered behind hands and woven into every conversation. In the heart of it all, Miss Jane Marple stood by a tea stall, her lace shawl draped over her shoulders, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Today she would spring her trap. Her leather-bound notebook, her hidden eye, lay safely in her knitting basket at home, its pages brimming with secrets. It had mapped the web of motives surrounding Mrs. Lacey's death. Dr. Haydock's clandestine meetings with the widow, Tom Carver's gambling debts, and the shimmering ink smudge linking the murder to the mysterious letter she'd received. The letter's warning, beware the shadow at Bantry's estate. Death waits in the wings, unseen by all, but the hidden eye had guided her, and now she was close to the truth. The killer was among the Fates crowd, and she would flush them out. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her handbag tucked under her arm. The letter rested inside, its lavender-scented paper a constant reminder of the puzzle. The ink smudge on Mrs. Lacey's hand, matching the letter and the stain on the Bantry library desk, was no accident. The killer had staged a robbery, wiping the dagger clean but leaving the ink a deliberate clue or a careless mistake. Her notebook pointed to Dr. Haydock and Tom as the strongest suspects. But she needed proof, a slip to confirm her suspicions. The fate was the perfect stage. Everyone was here: Colonel and Dolly Bantry, Dr. Haydock, Tom Carver, even Mr. and Mrs. Price. Miss Marple moved through the crowd, her steps slow, her smile gentle. To the villagers, she was just a kind old lady, but her mind was a trap. Ready? 2 snap shut. She stopped at a stall selling embroidered handkerchiefs, chatting with Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife. "Such a lovely day," she said, her voice soft, "though it's hard to enjoy with poor Mrs. Lacey gone." Mrs. Clement nodded, her eyes darting to the crowd. "It's awful, Jane. They say it was a robber, but I don't believe it. Knew too much, that one." Miss Marple tilted her head, encouraging more. "Oh, did she ever mention anything unusual?" Mrs. Clement leaned closer, whispering. She was always hinting at secrets. "Last week, she told me Dr. Haydock was in too deep. I didn't ask what she meant." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Her notebook had noted Dr. Haydock's late-night visits to Mrs. Lacey's cottage, his tense expression after. This was another thread tightening the web. She thanked Mrs. Clement and moved on, her eyes scanning for her suspects. She spotted Tom Carver by the cake stall, his boyish grin strained as he joked with a group of young men. His hands fidgeted, and his eyes kept flicking to the edge of the green as if he wanted to run. She approached, her smile grandmotherly. "Tom, dear, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm. Tom started, his grin faltering. "Oh, Miss Marple, I'm fine. I suppose it's been rough, with the police and all?" She nodded, her eyes soft but piercing. "They're saying it was a robbery, but I wonder. Mrs. Lacey was so clever, wasn't she? Always noticing things." Tom's face paled, his fingers twisting a button on his jacket. "Why, yeah, she was too clever, maybe," excused himself, hurrying away. Miss Marple watched him go, her lips pursed. His fear was real, but was it guilt? Her notebook recorded his debts and Mrs. Lacey's threats to expose him. He had motive, but his nervous energy felt more like panic than cunning. She needed to test Dr. Haydock next. She found him near the flower show, examining a prize rose with forced interest. His gray hair was neat, but his hands trembled slightly, betraying his calm facade. "Good afternoon, doctor," she said, joining him. "Such a lovely fate, though it's hard to forget last night." Dr. Haydock stiffened, his smile tight. "Indeed, Miss Marple. Terrible loss." She tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Lacey was so lively. I heard she kept a diary full of little observations. Did she ever show it to you?" It was a lie, a baited hook, and she watched his reaction closely. Dr. Haydock's eyes, widened, his hand jerking to his pocket. A diary. No, she never mentioned. I mean, I wouldn't know. His voice cracked and he turned away, muttering about a patient. Miss Marple's heart leaped. That flinch, that panic hit was as if he'd seen a ghost. Her notebook had hinted at his secrets, and now she was sure. He knew something about a record, perhaps her own notebook. Had Mrs. Lacey stolen it or seen it somehow? She needed to act. The fate was crowded, but she could use it to her advantage. She slipped her handbag from her arm, loosening the clasp so the letter and a small notebook similar to her real one, but filled with fake notes speaked out. She moved toward a bench near the tea stall, where Dr. Haydock and Tom were both in view. Sitting down, she accidentally dropped the handbag, letting it spill open. The letter and fake notebook landed on the grass, the notebook's leather cover glinting in the sun. She bent slowly, as if struggling, and watched from the corner of her eye. Dr. Haydock, standing nearby, froze, his gaze locking on the notebook. His face drained of color, and he took a step forward, then stopped, his hands clenching. Tom, passing by, glanced at the spill but kept walking, his eyes darting away. Miss Marple's heart pounded. Dr. Haydock's reaction was raw, almost desperate. He knew that notebook wore, thought he did. She gathered her things, her movements. Deliberate, and tucked the fake notebook back into her handbag. Dr. Haydock turned away, his shoulders stiff, and hurried toward the edge of the fate. Miss Marple rose, her mind racing. The trap had worked, but she needed to confront him to pull the final thread. She followed at a distance, her steps light, weaving through the crowd. He stopped near the churchyard, his back to her, his hands in his pockets. "Dr. Haydock," she called softly, approaching. He spun around, his face pale. "Miss Marple, I didn't see you." She smiled, her eyes steady. "I couldn't help noticing your interest in my little book. It's just a diary, full of silly notes." "But Mrs. Lacey had one. Like it, didn't she?" 'Twas another lie. But the effect was instant. Dr. Haydock's breath hitched, his eyes wild. But his voice betrayed him. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "I think you do. She had something of mine, didn't she? Something you recognized." Dr. Haydock's hands shook, and he looked around as if seeking escape. Then his shoulders slumped, and he whispered, "She stole it. Your notebook. She showed it to me, said it was full of secrets about everyone. She wanted money to keep quiet." Miss Marple's heart stopped, her notebook, her hidden eye in Mrs. Lacey's hands. It was unthinkable, yet it explained everything: the letter, the ink, the murder. "And you killed her to get it back," she said, her voice calm but certain. Dr. Haydock's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded, his voice breaking. "She wouldn't stop. She'd ruin me, ruin everyone. I didn't mean to. I just wanted the book." He confessed in a rush, the words spilling like water from a broken dam. Mrs. Lacey had found the notebook in Miss Marple's cottage during a tea visit, slipping it into her bag. She'd recognized its value, its coded secrets about St. Mary Mead, and used it to blackmail Dr. Haydock, threatening to expose his affair and other indiscretions. At the dinner party, he'd followed her to the library, begging her to return. When she laughed, waving the notebook, he grabbed the dagger from the display and struck in a panic. He'd staged the robbery, scattering papers and opening the window, but forgot the ink on her hand from their struggle over the letter she'd been writing a copy of the warning to Miss Marple. Miss Marple listened, her face serene but her mind blazing. The notebook was safe. She realized she'd never left it unguarded. Mrs. Lacey must have taken a similar book, mistaking it for the real one. The letter was her attempt to warn Miss Marple, perhaps out of guilt, using the same ink she'd. When it was still hidden in her knitting basket, she touched his arm, her voice gentle. "You must tell the police, Doctor. It's the only way." He nodded, his face crumpling, and let her lead him back to the fete, where Inspector Slack was sampling a scone. Miss Marple explained quietly, her words precise, and Slack's eyes widened as Dr. Haydock confessed again. The crowd parted, whispering. As the doctor was led away, his head bowed, Miss Marple returned home, her steps slow but steady. In her parlor, she sank into her armchair and pulled the real notebook from its hiding place. She opened it, her fingers tracing the coded pages. It was safe, its secrets intact. She wrote a final entry. Dr. H. killed ML over stolen book, mistook for hidden eye, ink and letter led to truth. Case closed. She closed the notebook, her heart calm. The village would talk for weeks, but Miss Marple would stay quiet. Her secret weapon hidden once more. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly. Outside, St. Mary Mead settled into the evening, its secrets safe in her hands. The hidden eye had seen, and the truth had prevailed.